Houston beats Utah 66-52 for win number 22 on the season, but the night was all about sharpshooter number 21. Emmanuel is the all-time leading three-point shooter in Cougar history. We got to talk about all that and more.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the post-game, first listen the next morning, or first listen anywhere in between. Making Locked On Sports Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world, making us the most listened to Houston Cougar show out there as well. I love all of the listeners, the interaction we get in these live shows post-game as Houston knocks off Utah. We got a lot to talk about this one. I want to talk some about, yes, Emmanuel Sharp will come up probably 3, 4, 27 times in this game, 27 points, 27 times. I also imagine we'll talk some about different things that look like struggles in this one. But we've got to continue talking about Houston and the undefeated black jerseys and the winning on the road they keep doing in the first segment. They just brought to you by everybody's over at FanDuel. And as the Olympics are going on, FanDuel's doing a great way to get in on that action. So make sure you check the buddies out over at FanDuel.com. But more on that later. Listen, Houston has been in Salt Lake City area. I guess Provo counts as the area since Friday. Big win, emotional win, lots of legs and energy spent in the win on Saturday. And then they turn around and play Utah in an ugly, ugly game on Tuesday night and pull off a 14-point win on the road. Now, I think lots of like numbers thrown into this and winning on the road and whatever, but I would point out Houston's only got one true road loss since 2024. That one was obviously in the white jerseys, up in Lubbock in another weird road trip. And look, I mentioned in the post game on Saturday that I had been, I thought, told, but maybe I was just assumed and told. Anyway, I thought I would. Anyway, that Houston was going to go back and forth between Salt Lake City area, between the state of Utah, I guess, and Houston to kind of keep the routine. They opted to not do that, stayed in Salt Lake City on Sunday instead of going back and forth. Late night Saturday night probably helped add to that. They watched Super Bowl, had fun, had team stuff on Sunday, then practice this Monday, get ready for Tuesday. I don't know, and I don't mean to say that Sampson would ever undo, redo those kind of situations. Frankly, he's not much of a redos kind of person. You live with decisions you make, and part of the reasons he's a great coach, frankly, right? I do wonder, though, some of the weirdness of this made this feel different. Having no night sleeping in your own bed might make it feel different, too. Look, Houston was favored by 18.5. They won by 14. I think it's fair to say that it was still a pretty commanding win. It never really felt like Utah was like within an arm's reach, or like the bully who keeps the kid, with his hand on his forehead down there, like, hey, you can't get to me anyway, kind of stuff. But honestly, Houston found ways to win. Anyway, now Houston had a couple of ugly turnovers of their own, so don't mean act like that they didn't have their own mistakes, but a big part of this was forcing 13 Utah turnovers. Even those ones that might have just been Utah throwing the ball to Casper, the friendly ghost, did feel like Utah was constantly rushed, under duress, under pressure in this one. And also completely flipped things that Emmanuel Sharp came out the gates super deluxe, crazy, sharpshooter level hot. He 6 straight threes. He had those 6 threes all happened in less than 9 minutes of basketball from the tip off. It was his night early. It was his show. I do think what was interesting was it looked like the next 5 minutes were Houston trying to figure out ways to force feed him the rock a little bit. And honestly, that is just so out of character for a Kelvin Sampson team. It almost felt like that threw off the offense, where guys were not in flow, not in rhythm, and they were all looking for 21 because they realized at 6 straight threes, he only needed 2 more to set the school record, right? And honestly, it's also about like, hey, if your teammate's hot, feed the hot hand. All of those things, I think, occurred at various points in this. But it did feel like that, interestingly, almost kind of threw things in the opposite way. Now, also worth pointing out that Houston was not like under duress to score in this game. They knew defensively they were going to continue to get the ball back. We mentioned forcing 13 turnovers. I should stress that on the points of the turnovers, Houston was really, really efficient with 20 points on 13 forced turnovers. That is pretty impressive, especially when you factor in that only 4 of those points were fast break points. They really were able to quickly turn around and have like a true offensive setup, even if it was not a live ball turnover. I also think it's worth pointing out that like Houston outside of so Houston was 9 of 26 from behind the arc, and that looks really good. 35%. That's efficient enough to be worth shooting them. However, Emmanuel Sharp was 8 of 13, which means the rest of the Houston Cougars were 1 of 13 from behind the arc, and on the road, well, that was good enough to get it done. I think the bigger factor there might have been, we're getting into the second segment already a little early. That feels more like it ties into having the big BYU win on Saturday. Now, other aspects of this win I think are important. Houston found a way to win without Kingston Flemings being a down offensive force. Flemings has kind of been your saving card, your trump card, or whatever you want to call it. Like, he's playing spades, he dropped the twos, whatever. Flemings has been that, right? You didn't need him to be that. Bluntly, he had 2 made field goals, and one of them was in garbage time last minute of the game, right? Like, you didn't need that kind of a night out of him. You didn't have some superhero performance of anyone outside of Manuel, frankly. He was your only scorer in double figures. You just found ways to win. It led with the defense, and outside of having trouble tracking Keanu Dawes a couple times, I feel like you really did a pretty good job on that in 2. Now, I also think that it's interesting because Keanu Dawes, you remember, is from Straight Joseph High School. He's a Houstonian. It felt like, honestly, well, he is their second leading scorer, and he is a good basketball player. I don't mean this in a slight. He played at a level that was kind of took me aback a step after watching 2 of their games and watching them last year when he was on their team. He clearly had a mission to take it to his hometown school. Now, I should point out, Keanu Dawes is a junior. I saw people on Twitter commenting like, hey, can we ever bring him home or whatever? 6'9", 225. He's a pretty well-built kid, too. That was all very much future conversations. I've never heard anything about it, but he is a Houstonian kid, and I think he really wanted to show out for his hometown program. I think it's kind of thing where he knows folks at home are watching that game, if no other game, from the Utah Utes, right? Also, Utah at 9 and now 15 is looking for things to hang their hat on. Beating Houston, the target on Houston's back, that would have absolutely, and a lot of it might have saved their coach's job. It might have saved some of those guys scholarship and Power 4 spots. Like that in modern basketball, that's what you're looking at. And that absolutely would have been a big deal for this program. I also think it's worth pointing out that this game was in Utah. Utah played in Lawrence, Kansas on Saturday and got to come back home. Houston obviously opted to not do all of that, right, and not go back and forth. And well, this is now, what is that, 10th loss in conference for Utah. They have played weirdly close games like this. I mean, BYU is a rivalry game, so that was a 13-point game is maybe not as surprising, but Kansas was a 12-point game, and then Kansas turned around 2 days later and beat Arizona without Darren Peterson. I guess the Utah and Arizona score was almost 20 points, but you also saw different games this season of theirs be much closer than that. And Tech was 14 points as well, for instance. Like, this is not uncommon for BYU, who plays for a Utah team that plays a relatively slow pace and keeps on keeping things within reach, right? And so that's kind of where I felt like this, you're winning on the road. And Houston, for what it's worth, is undefeated in true road games in the black uniforms. They lost one at Tech this year wearing not the black uniforms, obviously. Winning on the road is really hard. And this is Locked On Cougs, not Locked On Cyclones or Locked On Horned Frogs. But the other big Big 12 game tonight ended up being Iowa State being unable to win on the road at TCU. Remember when Houston played TCU, we were talking about how they've had weirdly close games, the bunch of top tier teams, and that they were going to beat one, and it was probably going to be a game in Fort Worth. And then Houston wins that game in a weirdly close one where Ag has a big first half, and you're looking for Emmanuel some in the second half. He was in foul or whatever. They pulled that out and won a close. We were like, oh man, it's not good enough. They're winning these close road games. Iowa State could not do that. Top 5 team in America, Iowa State could not do that. Took their third loss of the season. And frankly, I don't mean this begrudgingly. We'll talk about Iowa State when we get there. I think they're a very talented team. I think they play a very difficult type of basketball to coach against. It's very physical. It's very similar to Houston, frankly. The Iowa State losses are by 9 to Cincinnati. Okay, people lose at Kansas, that happens, and now at TCU, but they also only beat Baylor by 3, beat Oklahoma State by 13. I guess Oklahoma State beats people now. That's what I know. They're kind of got some weird things on their schedule. Big wins over Purdue and non-conference, and they certainly beat the brakes off of Syracuse, team that Houston had their own problems with, right? So I get that there's other parts of their resume that read differently, but winning on the road is really hard, and Houston found a way to do that yet again. I don't think Houston is going to be finishing up Big 12 play with just one regular season conference loss. I imagine there's another one or two somewhere in there, if not more, if we're being really honest. It's as good a conference as there's ever been. 3 top 5 teams, the top tier talent in this conference is truly remarkable. But I do want to wrap up this segment, I should say, by saying that don't just take oh man, we only won the road game by 14. How can we not beat Utah by more? All those kinds of winning on the road in this conference, especially back-to-back road games in a span of 4 days. That's really hard to do. That's for a lot of programs what you call a scheduled loss, right? And so you end up seeing things kind of figure themselves out from there. Now, hey, we're back. I don't know what just happened there. I do want to talk some about how I think those are there though. I want to talk some about how Houston does have stuff I think they need to keep an eye on and keep some worries for in the second segment. But before we get to that, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Indeed. Now, hiring is not always about just finding someone willing to take the job. It's often about finding the right person, the right background, someone who can actually help you and your business move forward, like apparently someone on the technical side of what happens in the Ainsworth household. On a serious note, though, if you want candidates who can match what you're looking for, Indeed sponsored jobs is the move, because instead of hoping the right person just stumbles across your post, Indeed can match with quality candidates by boosting your job listings to the people who fit specific criteria like skill, certifications, different locations, etc. Look, if I were hiring, I would not want someone who could just help me out. I want someone who can have real experience, can jump right in and really elevate what we were doing. Saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through different mismatches and things like that with sponsored jobs. Your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit. And here's the real stat, though, for folks at home. In the minute I've been talking to you about Indeed, companies like yours have made 27 hires using Indeed, according to their own data at Indeed.com worldwide. Now, if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all the boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners to the show can get $75 sponsored job credit to help your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Today's show is also brought to you by us over at FanDuel, because the winter games are officially here. And if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following winter games on FanDuel just makes more sense. From medal counts, individual events, finding your favorite angle in sports you care about the most or that you're learning about as they're happening in front of you, FanDuel gives you the most ways to stay connected with that action. Hockey games, niche competitions. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. Play your game. Parker Ainsworth, Locked on Cougs. I want to remind you guys to join the Everydayer Club if you have not already. If you just want more Locked on Cougs, lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer. Dayer is where you get more information about the program, but it's a great way to get all access to me and more. Access to ad-free audio, invite to members only Discord server, all access episodes of Locked On Cougs, one-on-one texting with me, a merch store, all kinds of fun things. The texting was a little bit haphazard during the game tonight, but I love talking through questions as the game is unfolding and happening using that feature of this. So make sure that you get in on the action over at lockedoncougs.supercast.com. It is in the show notes right now if you need it. So in this segment, I will say most people, whether they're texting me, tweeting at me, or even some of the people in the comment section of this video, I do think were commenting various forms of why isn't this a different spread? What is happening in this one? Why can't we seem to get things under control? And look, I mentioned the first segment, I'm going to preach it. I am never going to be upset by double-digit wins on the road, especially second game of a road trip, 4 days, all that. I do think there are things this team needs to fix. And as I've been mentioning that this team is like ahead of schedule relative or similar schedule relative to last year's team that ended up getting to the national championship game, that team did get a lot better in February and March, and just assuming that this team will or would does feel like a disservice to the great team that was last year, right? So while Emmanuel Sharp hits more threes on the side here, because apparently he just never going to stop missing threes, what a night for that guy. The offense struggled outside of him, right? And so you look at, Emmanuel Sharp, 27 points, no one else over double digits. Milos Uzan had 9 points, but had an uncharacteristic 2 turnovers. And I think that, look, I think that there are people ragging on him a lot because he is the easy target. He's frequently feeling like the 5th best offensive option out of the 5 starters, which is saying a lot because JoJo Tugler is not a guy you draw up offense for necessarily. They give him the first, set out of the gate or whatever, typically. I still think, though, that a big thing that he brings to the table in Milos is the defensive side of the basketball. He's playing tremendous defense as a guard, typically getting the best guard matchup in the game. Don McHenry was a big part of that this evening. Don McHenry is averaging 17.9 points per game, with Milos as the primary defender. I don't quite have the synergy stats in front of me, but just raw stats. You had Milos match up with him to start, and he had 5 points. That's less than a third of what he's typically averaging, right? Did not let him get loose in a game that, frankly, seemed like they had a couple guys that did. Keanu Dawes got loose. Traore Brown got loose. What was the guy's name? It was Traore was the other guy. Terrence Brown was the guy I'm talking about. He got loose for a dozen points or so, too. Like, Houston did give up a handful of scoring outputs, not Don McHenry. Don McHenry had Milos on him. Right now, as far as fixing his own offense, look, when I talked to you about this in December, I was like, let him continue to grow into his new role. We're still figuring out exactly how that works best, because Kingston has quickly turned into a guy that you cannot take off the floor, even in a game like tonight where he had just 4 points. But Milos does, I think, need a couple of minutes somewhere in that first half, preferably in that first 10 minutes, where he can kind of get the flow of the offense to him in a true point guard role. And Kingston's not quite the off-ball player to make all of that happen. And so it does lead to some challenges. I don't want to act like it doesn't. I will say, though, that his defense outweighs those challenges as I see it. If you're looking at the seesaw of events there, I also think bluntly, when you look at it, there are other specialists on this team. Mercy Miller comes in. He's a quick bucket. Isaiah Harwell comes in. He's a get on the floor, get dirty kind of guy, similar to Ramon Walker. Different positions, obviously. Chase McCarty comes in. He's a bigger body 3-and-D kind of guy. Everyone's got their specialty. I think that between this program, and this program's been successful for a long time, Sampson, they'll always opt for making sure that the guy that's specialty is defending the other team's best guard gets 20-plus minutes. Now, there were things Milos did wrong, and he only played 24 minutes. He's averaging up over 30. I don't think those two things are unrelated, right? I do think, though, that I think that he's the easy guy to criticize sometimes for folks when you're sitting at 22-2 and trying to find ways to poke holes in the program. And I don't mean to say like he has no flaws. I just don't know that they're holes, right? Comments coming in here as well. Corn Holy likes talking about cash, apparently. Here we go. About Go Coogs got good win on the road. No players got hurt, and now we go home. Do we think we'll lose two Big 12 teams? Who do we think we'll lose to? I keep saying, I think it's hard to win on the road. You got to go to Iowa State, and you have never won there. You got to go to Fog Allen. And I guess you have technically won there, but that was a crazy comeback win to make that happen. I could see you dropping at least one of those. I do think Houston can catch Arizona at home. I think that things are setting up for that to actually work in their favor. I think that the truth there is that there will probably also be like a Big 12 tournament. I guess technically that's not the regular season. I said two in the regular season. I think you'd drop either one of those, Iowa State or Kansas. And I think that ultimately, like, it would not surprise me if you somehow drop both of those by combined 5 points, something crazy. Because you remember last year, like, as crazy as last year was, you won like the UCF game by a last second bucket, and you won Arizona by 4, and you won the Kansas game that we just alluded to at the craziest comeback of all comebacks there at the end, right? And so obviously 27 points from Emmanuel Sharp will always help. Emmanuel Sharp's kind of put the team on his back, put him in the backpack, and carried the people on through to this point that's typically been Kingston. It was nice to see it be somebody else. Walter points out that Sampson was coaching. Milos is awesome. Love him. I think everyone likes Milos as also part of this. Like he's a really easy guy to like and an easy guy to root for, which is a good thing. But I do think it was funny to watch, like, on the Sampson's coaching part of that comment. I don't know if you saw or if you're paying attention. There was a turnover in the final 30 seconds with a lot of bench guys in garbage time. And Sampson's out on the floor yelling, and I really thought he was about to call a timeout to choose somebody out with less than 30 seconds left in double-digit lead. He called one timeout right before that to get subs in. It was pretty interesting. Okay, like, he's still out here working. Speaking of working, Emmanuel Sharp, we talked about him before, we talked about him more tonight. 27 points, all-time leading three-point shooter. We got more to break down on that in 1 second, but first...
I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. Dawn Staley and South Carolina remain on top of the SEC standings after handing Tennessee their worst defeat in program history with a final score of 93-40. In the 43-point win, South Carolina shot 69% from the field. Tessa Johnson had a perfect shooting night, scoring 24 points, shooting 4 for 4 from the floor, including 2 threes, and made all 4 of her free throws. And UCLA remains undefeated in Big Ten play, topping Michigan 69-66 as Player of the Year contender Lauren Betts put up a double-double, scoring 16 points, collecting 16 rebounds, and adding 5 assists and 3 blocks. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts the same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Parker Andrews locked on Cougs here. Houston wins 66-52. Another road win in the undefeated black uniforms. Big moment for the program, though, was Emmanuel Sharp. 27 points, had 6 threes in the first less than 9 minutes, but finished with 8 of 13 from behind the arc. Good enough to make him the leading three-point shooter of all time in Houston Cougar history. He had the most three-point field goals made of any Houston Cougar in the history of the program. And I don't mean to like dismiss other parts of this game. We got time between now and Saturday, Kansas State, to talk about that too. Getting Emmanuel, I'm going to continue to look at like where he sits in different charts, because he is very, very quickly turning into a guy that's going to be climbing up the all-time wins lead at Houston. He can't catch Jawan Roberts. Jawan Roberts also played 6 years of college basketball, but he is set to pass Fabian White and become second later this month if all things go as planned. look, if he were to go undefeated the rest of the way and win the national championship, he'd be at 133. Fabian White is at 121. I would really love for that to happen. Obviously, get 133, but that's crazy, crazy, right? You also have Emmanuel Sharp sitting here climbing the charts. He's almost into the top 10 and scoring all the time in the University of Houston. He'll never catch Elvin Hayes at the top. We kind of broke that down at one point. How that'd be absolutely like the Elvin Hayes numbers are crazy, right? I think it was an all access deal, but like truly remarkable. You have to average 35 points a year for 3 years. And frankly, you need to kind of, anyway, to do it in the 90 whatever games, like be super fast, right? I also think, though, that Emmanuel, between the scoring, the winning, the story, frankly, he gets here in the Jarris Walker class, but he's technically a December grad of the year before because he comes in a red shirt and fixes his leg because he has a bad leg injury at the end of high school. He's changed his body. And it was funny looking at pictures to make the graphic we put out for it, Locked on Cougs social media stuff. Obviously, the big story was he lost almost 20 pounds of body, and it was body fat pounds between last season and this season. I think they said it might have been closer to 15, but it just looks dramatic, right? But even you go like from his own freshman year to his sophomore year, or his sophomore year to his junior year, or like when he showed up on campus as red shirt to that freshman year, Emmanuel's body transformation, his dedication to his craft is fascinating because it's so visible, right? Like go back and look at that team with he and Marcus and Jamal. I was really looking for a picture of he and Marcus together, to be honest, of he and Marcus and Jamal and that backcourt, right? Playing with Terrence Arsenault as a freshman and Jarris Walker on that team. Like Emmanuel's face is almost unrecognizable compared to where it is by literally the next season. You can track it based on uniforms. Remember his sophomore season, they had those uniforms that they were kind of supposed to wear on the Australian trip, then of wearing for the first part of the season before ultimately getting a different uniform that they would then wear for the rest of that season. Like you can kind of track it by following those things along. And Sharp's journey has been incredible to watch. He's really look, he's not the boisterous vocal guy that other leaders have been. He's much more of the follow my example kind of guy. And he's the kind of guy who can give you 27 points on the road and lead you to victory as he did tonight. But Emmanuel Sharp's one of the most fun guys to cover because the way he plays, not just the leadership he has, but the way he plays. We're like, look, if you just outlined historic program in Houston, right? Houston has the most Final Fours in the state of Texas, a couple Final Fours in the last 5 years, most wins since 20, whatever that stat is, but most wins since the pandemic, all those kind of numbers, right? And you said the all-time leading three-point shooter at this historic program. You're thinking of a guy that's like catch and shoot, running around. You're thinking of a guy that is doing a lot of finessing and those kind of things, never gets out the shooting gun and or anything like that. Emmanuel Sharp's nickname is Crash. He throws his body around with reckless abandon all the time, right? He is throwing his body at the rim, his hair is flying everywhere as he's going through traffic in the lane. He's getting in front of guys, trying to take charges. He's, wrestling for rebound. Like he defies logic in a lot of ways because most of the classic like 3-point specialists you think of, these sharp shooters, which his last name is Sharp makes this kind of fun. Those guys play such a distinctly different kind of basketball than Emmanuel wants to play. Like you have to want to play that. Frankly, worth pointing out, it's probably like the most Kelvin Sampson thing to have. Your all-time program leading 3-point shooter is this guy who's also a junkyard dog, right? Like those things going together are truly, truly spectacular and special, right? He also like has these nights like tonight where he goes absolutely crazy from behind the arc and has 6 threes in the first, whatever that was, 9 minutes. And it just seems like it doesn't make any sense. The joke that he came out, it's playing at altitude, more altitude tonight than you had the other night. 48 hours away or whatever is 72 hours removed from that other game, big emotional game, hadn't been home since or whatever, and all of that. And after like 10 minutes, so he's like tugging to the hey, coach, and he came out. I kind of think he cooled off at that point. Beefhead here asked about Emmanuel Sharp the league, and he'll, I'm sure, test things out, obviously, in the off season this year. I was kind of surprised he didn't do the deal like Milos last year, where he like entered his name and came back. He obviously did not do that. He's just going to stick around the program and go off afterwards. I think he's the kind of guy who's going to have a long, illustrious career in other aspects of pro basketball. He's just kind of the guy that's got the awkward size. Now, for what it's worth, I said the same thing about LJ, and I think Emmanuel's probably more built for the NBA than LJ, and LJ's kind of sticking on these 2 ways and stuff like that. He ain't getting a whole lot of NBA run, but he is like sticking at that periphery, and if someone gives him a shot, the dude's going to score, right? So Emmanuel might be built more for that than LJ is, just being a little bit stronger, having long wing. He's listed at 6'3", but that wingspan's more like 6'7". Do the meme, and he's I think probably built more for it than other guys, right? And so I happy to be wrong on that. I also think, for what it's worth, that the NBA is kind of getting to the point where we have these gigantic point guards, guys that are 6'6", and so that they bring the ball up, and so you can stand to have a 6'3" shooting guard next to them, like Emmanuel Sharp, in a way that you might not have been able to 10 or 15 years ago. That is future things. I will say the no ceilings guys love him as a prospect just because they love his game. They're not putting him in the drafted range, but that doesn't mean you don't make the NBA either, right? So we'll talk more about that as we go. I just Emmanuel's the kind of legacy that, like, you're going to look up in 10 years and see his name all over different walls and books at the University of Houston from what he did in his time there. And I don't want to just dismiss, walk away, forget about those moments. And the number's going to go up a lot. He's going to break 300, I'd imagine, this season in terms of three-pointers made. And that's kind of crazy to think about. But really, really exciting time to be a Houston Cougar. Now, we got more to break down on basketball this week. We've got Kansas State this weekend. Was just connecting earlier with our Locked On Kansas State Wildcats host to make sure we get a crossover for that one, because Jerome Tang is a guy I like a lot at a personal level, but he's also on the hot seat there in the Little Apple. And then after that is this gauntlet we continue to talk about, where you have such a stressful 10 days of basketball. It's going to be so much fun to watch, but really, really hard. And so we'll talk about that and more very, very soon at Locked On Cougs. Hit subscribe and the bell so you know when things go live. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, and that means your team every day. Go Cougs.